Okay, thank you very much for the introduction, Roger, and thank you to the Innovation Network for giving me the opportunity to come and talk this evening. As Roger said, I'm Sara Pepper, and I'm the Director of Creative Economy, a relatively new team and area of work for Cardiff University. I bet not many of you were expecting Elvis at the start of this presentation, and I'm going to sort of start in the middle, actually, and that's why I've picked this image this evening. So Elvis was a significant feature in the Rooms Festival, which was an event that took place over 3 days in Bristol about 2 weeks ago. So what was the Rooms Festival? It was the culmination of the REACT project that's already been mentioned tonight, which was a 4-year AHRC, Arts and Humanities Research Council funded knowledge exchange project between businesses and industry for those working in the creative industries and within the creative economy, specifically to engage in new and digital technologies. The reason I start with the Rooms, the end of that 4-year project, is because having attended in person and also seen a lot of content online about that, it was quite an extraordinary culmination of a 4-year research project. So the Rooms was a 3-day festival held in a former, is now sort of used for other uses, a former fire station, police cells and magistrates court in the middle of Bristol. And what they did was they showed the output of all of the projects that were part of that 4-year initiative in an enormous sharing event that took place over 3 days and attracted in excess of 5,000 visitors. Now, I don't know about you, but any other Research Council funded activity that I have taken part in has never seen quite that kind of outcome. So I think that was a good place to start. And I just want to mention in particular, there was a film last week called on BBC4 called Orion, which was just one of the projects that was involved in AHRC. So if you haven't seen that, worth following up. Okay, so more about REACT. You've heard about the end of REACT and what that looked like, but what was the REACT project? So it started in 2012, and it was one of 4 knowledge exchange hubs that in total received £16 million from the AHRC. The particular hub that Cardiff University were involved in was in partnership with 5 other universities: Bath, Bristol, UWE, University of the West of England, Exeter and Cardiff. And what that project and what that funding supported was to encourage projects and activities between academics and industries to engage in knowledge exchange that had a creative economy output using technology. Now, Anthony's project was one of those, quite I was going to say one of our favourites. It's one of our favourites. And I had a life after the project, and he's going to talk in a lot more detail about it afterwards. But Cardiff had 10 projects that were part of the 53 that the 4-year project supported. And that engaged with 385 creative companies and 287 academics over that 4-year period. The projects at Cardiff, the 10 projects, worked with a variety of academics from different schools, from the School of Journalism, the School of Music, the School of English, Communication and Philosophy, and the School of Archaeology, History and Religion. So academics from a number of different arts and humanities disciplines, partnering with an industry partner to do something wholly new for them both. And there's lots of learning. I'm sure Anthony will share his own experiences, but you know, that journey was different to each of the projects. As I said, Cardiff had 10, 5 of which have had a life after the project ended. So Anthony's Jekyll 2.0 is one of them. Book Kernel is another, which engages in live publishing at events. News Story is a hyper-local news app that is also continuing its life after REACT, and something called With New Eyes I See, which is an experience-based documentary project. We're also working with a company called Ompar, who did a project called Doc 360, a 360-degree documentary experience that is also continuing and going forward. So this project, REACT, I suppose for our work at Cardiff University and a number of our academic colleagues here, allowed us and enabled us to engage with industry in a new way, to share what we were doing and to think and learn and work in a different way, partnering with industry and using technology to do something wholly new. It also came at a time, if you think about the last 2 or 3 years in Cardiff, the city's life cycle, where there's been a number of other changes in the creative economy in the city. Pinewood Studio have opened up a new base just outside of the city. The BBC have very recently confirmed that they will be moving their headquarters to the city centre. Rothlock and drama, the whole of the drama production for the BBC has moved down to Cardiff Bay. And a number of other significant moves of new companies or inward investment companies moving from London, from other cities, and investing to do their productions and their activity in Cardiff. Also, the city itself has grown and is growing exponentially. The most recent report from Cardiff City Council is that by population, we're now on a par in terms of our growth trajectory with London. So we're the fastest growing UK city alongside the capital, and one of the fastest growing capitals in Europe. There's going to be a new city transport infrastructure, the city metro. The city region has become a concept that we're discussing more and more and thinking about differently. And a city deal request has gone in to central government to think about how we can finance and make all of that happen. So it's been quite an interesting time in the city in terms of not just, the creative economy growing, but the city itself growing. Now, all of these, led to the university having a very considered look at the creative economy, thinking of its importance within the city and our place within it post-React. And that led to the legacy, which is the creative economy team. So we're a relatively small unit, and we've been going just over a year. And our remit is to work to better understand and support and enable the creative economy in the city and its region. So, as we say here, our ambition is to work with others to make Cardiff a capital of creativity. So we're keen to work with partners, not just within the university, but external too, to better understand this area, to develop physical and real spaces and initiatives to allow this area to grow. So a great introduction from Roger, but I was keen to just talk a little bit more about definitions, because we talk a lot about the creative industries and the creative economy, but what does that mean exactly? And so I thought these two definitions would be quite useful. So when we think about the creative industries, we would define that as those sectors which specialise in the use of creative talent for commercial purposes. So by that, I mean a number of sectors that will probably mean something very specific to you. So sectors such as TV, radio, film, craft, art, design, fashion, music, gaming, theatre and performance and dance. So each of those sectors, the music industry, for example, large within itself, but joined together to form this group that we refer to as the creative industries, as defined by Chris Smith some sort of 20 years ago. The way this has changed in terms of the definitions in the last 5 years is with the advent of this term that we now call the creative economy. And what we mean by the creative economy is all those creative industry sectors that I just listed, and I probably forgot a few, but you get the idea that there are quite a few of them. And also all the other economic activities which involve the use of creative talent for commercial purposes, i.e. the creative jobs in other sectors. So if we use an example, a large organisation in Cardiff that I spoke to recently employs 30 creatives within their organisation. So they're a financial services business, but they see the need to recruit and employ and engage designers, marketeers, PR professionals, app developers, gaming professionals, and so on, in order to deliver the services that they have. So creative economy, therefore, just to recap, is all the creative industry sectors that stand alone and specialise in creative talent for their commercial purposes. That the extension of the creative economy is all those other creative jobs in other sectors that aren't creative industry sectors. Okay, so why is this important? Well, again, Roger gave some very key stats. The creative economy is very economically important in terms of jobs and growth. 1 in 12 jobs in the UK economy. We're tracking just under that in Wales, a return of £8.8 million per hour, 2.6 million jobs across the UK. It's important and growing at this particular moment, not in the least because of the internet and digital environment, which is really key to note. You know, why is it now that it's become possible for a musician who's based in Cardiff to work with somebody in LA who can work with somebody in Athens? You know, you could, the mobility, if you like, of being able to engage and work with people across boundaries, the internet and the digital environment has really enabled that, which has also helped this environment to grow. Another reason that we feel that creative economy is important is around creating places which are more conducive to live in and thinking about creative cities or creative places as an offering. So if we think about Liverpool, for example, or Hull, which is going to be City of Culture, the next City of Culture, you know, these are ways that places are engaging people to make them interesting for people to live. You know, Cardiff has recently been reported as being the most livable city in the UK. I would suggest that its cultural and creative offering is really important to contribute to this, and in terms of how the city develops in the future, to provide a place that is engaging and that people want to live in. It's also important to us at the university in terms of our current thinking and strategic approach going forward. Our strategy, the way forward, and the development of the innovation system that I'm sure has probably been discussed at previous sessions, the development of a way of thinking, a way of working and buildings that will encourage that at the university is all connected to you know, the work that we're doing here. There are a number of policy documents and reviews that are also in process, the Whitty Review, the Dowling Review, the Creative Learning Strategy in Wales, that also very much connect with this larger creative economy picture and why it's important. So what are we actually doing in the creative economy team? I said that we existed to better understand and support and enable growth and innovation in the creative economy in the city. So we're working inside the university to encourage research and innovation in this area. We were having an interesting conversation before we started tonight, how the creative economy, if you like, is quite a cross-cutting theme across a number of schools at the university. And there are all sorts of activities that are happening here, whether it's embedded creatives, our head of design is in here tonight. You know, we have a number of illustrators and designers and artists working in and at the university, as well as academics who are researching in areas that are related to the creative economy. Until the creative economy unit existed, we didn't know exactly where they were or how they could join up. So we're keen to uncover that and curate more research to happen within that theme, so that we can apply for more funding, so that we can engage new audiences, and so that we can better understand this area and what's happening in Cardiff. Externally, we have developed a network called Creative Cardiff. What we saw was that there were a number of these kind of networks all around the UK and further afield, where there was an environment where through peer support, the creative economy community could engage with each other to encourage innovation and growth. For example, Creative Edinburgh, Creative Dundee, Creative Bath, Creative Bristol, Creative Cape Town, they are across the globe. We didn't see any of that kind of infrastructure in Cardiff, and in fact in Wales at all. We don't have any of these particular kind of networks. So first off, we thought it would be useful to set something up like this and see how people engage with it. So what Creative Cardiff will do is offer a web platform and also activities in real time where the creative economy community can get together, can connect, can find information and resources that it needs in order for everybody from individuals to organizations to initiatives to thrive and flourish in the city. What we're doing in our first year is a campaign called 52 Things. And what that will be is 52 activities across the year that we hope will help the creative economy to do this. So, for example, we've held a number of events where we've brought in speakers from outside of Cardiff to talk about what's happening in their respective locales in this. So we had Dick Penny, the inspirational chief executive of the Watershed in Bristol, come and tell us last week what's been happening in Bristol in this area. We've also done events that profile creators within the city to share more about what they're doing, because people were saying to us that they didn't feel that they had the kind of platforms where they could share the work that they were doing in order to share it with the community and attract investment or partners or other opportunities like that. We've also published a number of resources that we think would be useful to this community, so that they can either have the information or the resources that they need. So that could be, for example, a list of all the other networks in the city that are available to them within their sectors. Now, it's important to say that Creative Cardiff is, there are a number of networks in the city. Creative Cardiff is not the only one. We mapped the networks for the creative community, and there are some 50 in the city. That's very healthy, and it shows the buoyancy of that community here. But what we found is that the networks are very, very siloed, so they exist for one very specific part of the sector. It wouldn't just be that they were for music, they might be for a very particular part of the contemporary music community. And actually, where we find from other city networks that there's been most growth and development is in crossing over into disciplines. So the interesting conversations are where a musician is talking to a poet, is talking to a gamer, is talking to a marketeer. And I think that was part of the strength of React, was getting that connection and getting those interesting conversations to take place. In terms of how we're doing this, the key is absolutely about partnership working. Creative Cardiff, and in fact all of our activities are undertaken in this way. Creative Cardiff is funded not just by the university, but by other partners, BBC Cymru Wales, Cardiff City Council and Wales Millennium Centre. And in terms of their involvement, we're very grateful to them for sponsoring the network to make it happen in real time. But it's also about their input into what they see as a vision for the city going forward, and their thoughts about the importance of this creative economy community in the city. One other thing I'd like to mention very briefly is, aside from our ambitions to do more research work within the university, and our ambitions to engage with the creative community outside through Creative Cardiff, another ambition we hold is to build a creative hub for that creative economy community in the city. Now, creative hubs are not a new phenomenon. They have been in development over the last 10 years, certainly. Cities usually have a number. So Barcelona has 7, Berlin has a lot, so does London. Bristol, just down the road, has 4 or 5. Cardiff has none at the moment. So we're saying that, we're talking about 1 in 12 jobs. We're talking about a community that's growing. We're talking about a community that's saying to us that workspaces, the kind of spaces that encourage innovation for them and connectivity and growth for them, are not in the city. So we are talking to partners about how we might realize that. The 4 hubs here are in a variety of different locations. Baltic Creative in the top left-hand corner in Liverpool. This is AIR in Falmouth, so another university-partnered initiative. This is a hub called Frappant in Germany, and this is in Lisbon, and it's shipping containers. So you can see the style and the kind of venture that we're looking to progress. But we'll update you on that as plans go forward. So just to sum up, really, what does success look like for us? How do we know when we've achieved what we've aimed to do? Well, we hope that the clusters in the city will be stronger, and that will mean more creative jobs, ultimately then economic growth for those organisations and for the city itself, better developed supply chains, and an enhanced and stronger creative city identity. I think that we could all relate to Cardiff being thought of as a sporting city. I'm not sure we would all consider it a creative city in its current guise. More collaborative research, obviously, from the inside, and some kind of cumulative mass by bringing together this community externally. In terms of how you can get involved, I'll be around afterwards, obviously, to chat to, but do talk to us. If this connects with either what you do or any of the people that you work with, please share your thoughts. Share information with others if there are any creatives that you know of who might be interested in what we're doing, and or if not, come to one of our events. It's not just the preserve of the creative community, this investment in a creative city. We are not exclusive. If you're a physicist or a computer scientist and you want to come along to Creative Cardiff, we would warmly welcome you. This is about opening up a discussion and debate. Join our network and get involved. We'd love to hear your thoughts afterwards. And I'll hand over to Anthony to talk to you about his specific project within React.
Try and recover. I'd also like to echo Sarah's thanks to Roger, Sian, and the rest of the Innovation Network team for the invitation to speak tonight, which I think it's a great opportunity really to talk about what's been going on. Sarah's already given you the overview of React, of Creative Cardiff, what's happened over the last 3 years, where we'll be going maybe in the next couple of years. And I really want to talk about my own experiences and about the project I worked on in relation to that, within that context, within that framework. So my background, as Roger hinted at, is from a kind of literary aspect. So I've worked for the last 20 years on mainly 19th century literature. I've also worked on digital humanities. So I've come at the kind of electronic digital world from a very academic point of view. But I've also had a kind of creative interest, and a project like React gave me the opportunity really to bring these two strands of interest, those two focal points together. So what I want to talk about for the next half an hour or so is a number of aspects that relate to my involvement in React, some of which Sarah's already covered, so I'll gloss through about the context of working as an academic within this knowledge exchange mechanism for creative endeavours. I'll talk a little bit about how we moved from literary text, Robert Louis Stevenson's Jekyll and Hyde, to this digital pervasive media project. Talking pervasive media, I will explain what that is as well in the what you can think of as the interlude in my talk. So I'll come up with some definitions about the terminology that is being employed. And then I want to talk you through actually what we did in the creative process, so that there's more of a sense of hands-on. What did it entail? And maybe there'll be some elements that might surprise you, or that you might find are actually natural extensions of what you've been thinking about with digital creativity. And finally, a few reflections, really, going forward in retrospect as well. Okay, so my involvement with React actually started around 2011 when Cardiff and its 4 partners were putting together the proposal for the hub to the Arts and Humanities Research Council. So they were scratching together a kind of a portfolio description of what would be on offer were the React hub to be funded. So we were asked at that point to suggest some potential kinds of project that we might offer were we successful in getting React off the ground. And so that was the first time I was made aware of it, and then there was a period where we were waiting to see whether or not it'd be successful. But my actual hands-on involvement began in the summer of 2012, where I was invited to what was called an Ideas Lab in Chapter. So this was part of the second of 5 rounds of funding that React offered. So the second round focused on the future of books and print. So the idea was, there's been a lot of discussion in the last 20 years about really where are we going with print in the digital age. And what they were inviting participants to do was come up with innovative, different ways of thinking about the book. So not simply, oh, well, we'll all be reading off tablets or smartphones, but actually, is the digital revolution changing what a book might mean in 5, 10, or 15 years? So we were invited to attend one of 3 Ideas Labs, that took place either in Cardiff, in Bristol, or Exeter. And I went to the one, as I said, in Chapter. And it was a great opportunity just to be thrown in with a bunch of other academics and creative practitioners, members of the kind of heritage industry as well, to just talk with no agenda, move around, have very promiscuous conversations, and see what happened and see what emerged. And I found that really interesting. I went there thinking I want to do something with this work I've been undertaking on Robert Louis Stevenson. I'll talk more about that shortly. But I want to do a kind of literary app, I thought. Maybe something on a smartphone, maybe something to do with the literary heritage industry. What I think nowadays might seem fairly conventional. I think about 4 years ago, 3-4 years ago, people were still wondering what apps were, what they meant in typical activity. So I went there with this idea. I met a lot of interesting people, had some very, very fascinating conversations. But it wasn't actually to be that the person I ended up working with was there at the Ideas Lab. In fact, another thing that was very, very important about React was the crucial role played by producers. So React employed a team of people whose job it was to facilitate meetings, to oversee projects, and to engage in the development of the different projects that were then supported by React. So although I didn't meet somebody who matched exactly what I was looking for, maybe I didn't offer what the people at the Ideas Lab were looking for, the producer, Joe Lansdowne, who was overseeing the books and print strand, said, I know just the person that you should speak to. So I was invited on effectively what was a blind date to Bristol, to the Watershed. I met up with the person who then would be my collaborator, Simon Evans, who'd had about a decade's worth of experience in developing immersive games, so street games, games that involve players moving physically within space, so city spaces, and those kinds of locations. So Simon had been part of the creative team behind a very successful zombie survival game called 2.8 Hours Later, which ran for about 4 years until relatively recently. And they'd actually had developed a wealth of kind of social networks, of industry experience, and also had a clear sense of what they were looking for in terms of the next project. One of the factors with a game like 2.8 Hours Later, which is played externally in a street location, is the expense of running it. I mean, there were so many costs. And in fact, that proved the success of 2.8 Hours Later proved to be a problem for the company that developed it in the end, because the cost just kept on spiraling upwards in terms of running the event. So at that time, Simon was looking for a different proposition that would use some of the development and research that they'd invested in over the years, but in a way that was more contained, that was more structured and could be anticipated in terms of costing. So they were looking for that kind of aspect. So Simon had come at this with his own agenda, and I was going in with my own. And so we had a series of meetings in the application process where we discussed what we might do as a potential project. And this is really what I want to talk about for the next couple of minutes, is how we moved then from this idea that I had of doing something with literary materials into something that crossed into Simon's world of immersive gaming. So when we think of adaptation, I guess it's natural to think of film, television, or radio versions of a book. But in many ways, while complex, the methodology of adapting to film, to television, to radio is typically from one linear form of narrative to another linear form of narrative. You know, you've got a beginning, you've got a middle, and you've got an end. So I'm not saying that adaptation isn't complex in its own right, far from it. But the challenge that we were facing actually was somewhat different. We wanted to translate a classic, globally recognized novel into this multi-nodal, interactive experience with the power to surprise and disrupt the experiences of the participants or players in terms of how they would understand the themes of the novel. So we were trying to bring an element of surprise back into the experience of Jekyll and Hyde. If you think about Jekyll and Hyde, it's become an archetypal terminology now. You know, if we talk about someone with a Jekyll and Hyde personality, we take it to mean somebody who's got these, different facets to them, this kind of split identity. The thing to remember is when Stevenson originally published the novel in 1886, those first readers of the novel didn't know anything about the relationship between the two characters named in the novel's title. There was a lot of speculation. And then there's the big reveal towards the end of the novel of, well, Jekyll and Hyde are, in fact, the same person. And so what we were trying to look at in terms of, I guess, honouring the novel's origins was how can we bring that element of disruption and surprise, that shock, into the experience of a new Jekyll and Hyde. So how can we push back beyond the archetypal nature of Jekyll and Hyde into something that is different, disruptive, and surprising? So what we thought is how we could honour as well the themes of the novel more directly. So the novel deals with, I'd say, about 3 or 4 core issues that were salient both in Stevenson's period and I think are also significant now. And it was about how we make those interconnections between then and now that were equally important to us. So there was a relevance to today, but also a kind of homage to the original moment of the novel's appearance. So Stevenson's novel is first and foremost about the complex relationship between science and society. It poses this fixation as a series of questions about how far scientists should and can go in their experiments and how comfortable we can really be with this form of scientific experimentation. So there's a lot of discussion about experimental brain science in the period, about vivisection that was taking place. And I think now, similarly, there are questions about biotechnology, about genetics, about cloning, all of these aspects about, how far can science push in terms of modifying the human organism. And so we saw a connection between these elements. We also saw that there's a kind of a relevance as well to these concerns, more in terms of everyday life, I guess. So our relationship with digital technologies, so smartphones, wearable technologies like smartwatches, and with platforms like Facebook and Twitter, are becoming ever more intimate. Our relationship between our everyday lives and digital technology is becoming more and more enmeshed together. And one of the questions we had was, what are the ramifications of this? What do we make of this convergence? Is it something to be celebrated? Is it something to be interrogated? And so we wanted to play on that kind of tension and that uncertainty, which again, we felt connected back to Stevenson's period. So we thought a way of reflecting Stevenson's interrogation of experimental medicine in the Victorian period might be to encourage players of this game to interrogate their own reliance on technology. So we would use technology not simply as a means of creating an effect or generating game mechanics, but we'd actually get players to think about technology as the central paradigm of the game. Finally, the novel's central motif is that of the divided self, of a man who sees himself caught between physical desires represented by Hyde on the one hand, and intellectual aspirations as signalled by Jekyll on the other. So you have this tension. In the novel, this is externally symbolized by kind of a labyrinthine depiction of London as this maze, this nightmarish maze that the characters wander through, trying to make sense. And the very modernity of London becomes both the symbol and the causal factor for this splitting of the self. So there's a sense in which Stevenson is arguing that modernity, as represented not only by the internal divisions of the psyche, but also by the external divisions and convolutions of the city itself, become this kind of perfect external, internal representation. So what we thought is we would create an experience in real space that would be like a maze. It would be a labyrinth that reflects those internal psychological structures and the external convolutions of modern life. So we would again try to honour the novel in terms of the structure of the experience that we would craft. So there'd be a sense of how structure would form an essence. So with these themes in mind, in our conversations, Simon and I wondered if there might be a way to use the technology that we had at our disposal to encourage players to consider whether their physiological responses shaped their psychological perceptions of the experience, or if instead they saw themselves as somehow able to apply their mental processes to master their physical reactions. So we wanted to create a game in which your body and your sort of thought processes in this reciprocal and quite tense relationship, so that you're always wondering, did that happen because I wanted it to happen, or did it happen because my body caused it to happen against my intentions? So I think there was a sense in which we tried to engage with, I guess, a question of, is there a way to measurably and legibly create a tension between our Jekylls and our Hydes? Okay, so we're playing with that idea. So in terms of what our aims were when we applied for the funding from REACT and how we articulated them, there were a number of ways we defined our research context for this. Well, we thought there was the issue of engagement. So part of the reason that I came to the REACT process with this idea of doing something with Stevenson in mind is because I'm working on a 40-volume library edition of the complete works of Stevenson. So his essays, his novels, his fiction, his travel writing, this kind of, big, expensive editions that we'll be producing over about a 15-year period. Part of what I thought is, well, we're generating a lot of intellectual capital here. We're generating a lot of material. A lot of that material is going to go into these volumes, but those volumes are going to go on university library shelves, which will be accessed by students and academic scholars. Is there a way of translating some of this wealth of material in other ways that might have a wider public appeal? So, in a sense, moving from coterie research activities, which have their own intrinsic value, towards wider engagement possibilities. So that was one of the agendas for the research. Another one was the thematic issues that I've just mentioned. My work on 19th century literature and Gothic and their involvement with science, particularly anxieties about how experimental medicine played out in the 19th century, can be compared with a lot of the debate about where are we going with the digital world now. Is it something, to be relied upon? There are lots of books that have been published about how the internet is changing, transforming how our brains work and changing us from deep, intense readers to shallow, meandering readers. And what are the repercussions of that? Some people celebrate it. Some people say it's something to be worried about. So there's a certain anxiety. There were issues as well about the connections of transition in terms of period that were occurring. So when Stevenson is writing, his world was transitioning in the Victorian era from essentially the steam age to the electric age. So things were accelerating at a pace with this new platform of technology that allowed hitherto unthought processes to move at size and speed that was frankly quite shocking. Similarly, we're in this transition from the analog to the digital age. I mean, I'd say we've transitioned, but we've still got both worlds occupying our perceptions. And so there's a kind of point of continuity, I think, there in terms of, that period at the end of the 19th century and this period into the sort of first 2 decades of the millennium. We also thought about the mechanics. So when Gothic literature was originally published, when it first appeared in the 18th and 19th centuries, the idea was that it was what was termed an affective form, that it was meant to affect you physiologically when you read it. So, when you go and see a horror film in a cinema, you're meant to have those shivers down your spine and, the shock and trembling of the moments of suspense. Well, similarly, the idea was that when you were reading these novels, you would have a similar physiological response. So as the hero or heroine experiences panic and terror, you as a reader similarly are affected by feelings of panic and terror. It's easy to underestimate that when the first readers of these novels were encountering these texts, they were reading them in drafty, poorly lit houses where they had maybe a candle, held up feverishly against the book to get to the next chapter. And, the floorboards would be creaking, the wind howling as they're reading about the wind howling and spectres, parading around in the pages. So there was a kind of quite a tight connection between the reading experience and the imaginative experience that we perhaps have separated from, except maybe when we go in the darkened amphitheatre of the cinema. So I think there was something we were trying to get to there, say, how can we unlock that sense of physiological response to these literary themes? Is there a way in which we can build sort of that biofeedback into the encounter? And there was also a final aspect that I was quite interested in, which was Stevenson's view that good literature is what he terms playful. It's like a game. Good writing is game-ish. It challenges us, it plays with us. So one of my favorite quotations from Stevenson is where he says, "Fiction is to the grown man what play is to the child. It is there that he changes the atmosphere and tenor of his life. And when the game so chimes with his fancy, he can join in it with all his heart." So he's saying that the best literature actually gets us to think of play imaginatively. It gets us to consider the different variables and possibilities of these imagined worlds that are constructed. And so we wanted to get that idea of play into the heart of the experience. So that was essentially my agenda. Simon, I don't want to speak too much for him because he's not here, but he had his own agenda as well, which he brought to those conversations, which I think were equally salient in shaping the project. So one of his key questions was, would something like this, this game that we were talking about, fit within the kind of suite of products that they were developing within the company? Does it have some kind of intersection? Clearly it did with the kinds of work that they were doing before. What about the creative opportunities and challenges they could face? Was there something that would inspire and drive them to pursue challenges that they perhaps had the resource but not the opportunities to explore? So there was this kind of creative puzzle that he was very interested in unlocking. They'd also worked on hacking together different forms of technology, but they didn't actually have an outlet for that. They didn't have a way of positioning that in a meaningful way at that point. So they were looking to find ways in which they could leverage the technology that they'd developed in ways that could be fitting into their creative impulse. So was there a way in which we could use the technology, and I'll talk more about this in a moment, in interesting ways. Of course, there was the thing that operates in the business world, which was, how cost effective would participation in such a project be? Would it actually yield returns, or was it just kind of blue sky dream that would have to be abandoned at some point, or was it something that would have business legs underneath it? And finally, unlike me, an academic, where my time could be bought out for a period, and someone else could come and do my teaching, for instance, these creative companies have projects that they have to work on, and if they take their eyes off one project, then it can slip backwards. So there was a question about how they could fit the time to focus on this Jekyll and Hyde project successfully within the kind of the wider range of products that they had to carry on maintaining and looking at. So there was the issue of how they would manage their time. So we agreed that these kind of overlapping concerns met quite effectively, and to go ahead with applying for the funding. And we generated a set of core research questions that I just want to zip through very quickly in applying to React. So one of the questions was, what do books represent nowadays? What do we understand by books? Are they just physical objects made up of paper and bindings? Or do books maybe suggest something a little bit more complex and notional? How do readers respond to narrative? Are there ways we can play around with ideas of readers and ideas of narrative in creative ways? Can we remediate a narrative text like Jekyll and Hyde to take a novel and put it within a gaming environment and make it successful in terms of the themes of the novel? Or does it just become a mess? I mean, that was one of the key questions. Is it possible to do this effectively? Can we make the use of things like biodata, so a person's biological functions within the space, actually meaningful and legible to the experience? So can you use things like breathing, heartbeats, posture, movement, in ways that people would say, oh, right, I know because I did this, or my body did this, this happened? Or is it just too subtle a gap? Is it something just people don't make the connection to? Can we move from that? Can we move from the way the body might operate and the decisions that participants might have in terms of going into the digital analysis of that and then back into the physical world? So in other words, can we actuate those experiences physically within the environment in a successful way? Or is it just, again, not possible given the current state of technology? And also, does gaming itself, does turning Jekyll and Hyde into a game open up new ways of understanding Jekyll and Hyde as a novel in terms of the Gothic? So the Gothic genre itself has focused primarily on text, or literary text. It turned to film about 30 years ago, and more recently it's been turning to video games. But this kind of immersive physical gaming hasn't been really dealt with in essence. So is there something that can be done with this? So we went through the application procedure, put our form in, we were shortlisted for interview. As part of the interview, we had to give a kind of a Q&A. We also had to make a pitch at the start of the interview, so it was like a business pitch, where we had to show that the project had legs, both intellectually and economically. So it's quite interesting for me as an academic to kind of come into that and say, how do I sell this? As an academic, this isn't something that we're used to, is kind of selling our research. We think, well, research speaks for itself, obviously. So it was quite interesting and eye-opening for me to be part of this kind of pitching process. And we were successful in getting the funding, which funded a first stage of the project between January and about May, June 2013. And the idea that React had was working in what they called a sandbox environment. So we were meant to work intensively, multiple days a week, over about a 3-month period in developing the project. So it wasn't this kind of long, slow burn. It was actually meeting regularly. We met regularly in the watershed about 3 times a week to develop the project. So from inception to prototype to kind of a working model. And the testament to React is that we were able to do that within that time frame. Normally with research grants, we think of about 3 years as sort of from beginning the project to when we successfully meet our research outcomes. This was sort of shrinking it down to 3 months. So it's very, very interesting, again, for me as an academic researcher to think, how might that work? How might that operate? Okay, so there are a few terms I want to take you through that explain what Jekyll 2.0 is about. And that's this idea of what is pervasive media, what is transmedia, how do these things link in? How do we explain them? So the media theory pioneer, Henry Jenkins, defines transmedia narrative as, quote, a process where integral elements of a fiction get dispersed systematically across multiple delivery channels for the purpose of creating a unified and coordinated entertainment experience. Ideally, each medium makes its own unique contribution to the unfolding of the story. In other words, you have an experience, but it's not simply going to a place and playing a game. It's not simply going on the internet and opening a set of clues. It's not simply a set of text messages that you might receive and interact with. It can be all of those things together. So you get a unified experience that can draw in together interactions on Facebook, that can draw in film projections, that can draw in participation. And so our experience isn't isolated to the one medium any longer of, say, going to watch a film. It could actually be watching a film, writing about the film, joining a fan club, a social network about the film, sharing thoughts, getting the T-shirt of the film, of the book, of the idea. It's kind of drawing different experiences across multiple media. So these transmedia fictions then involve mixing or moving across and through multiple platforms that deliver a single experience. Of course, they're nothing new. This isn't an invention of the last 10 years. If you think about murder mystery evenings, which take a narrative and then have players enact the game in real space, or DVD board games. Do you remember those DVD board games from about 15 years ago where you put the DVD and at crucial points when you're moving around the board, it said press play now? I think they were quite clunky, but there was an idea again that you were moving between the board game space and the television screen to get the overall experience. I think what's perhaps innovative, though, about modern transmedia narrative is the ways in which interactivity, and the particular interactivity of the individual within that space, is increasingly employed as an adjunct to or alternative form of narrative. So it's as important about what you're doing at the given time as how you're meeting the story. You generate the story as you go along. And there's more and more emphasis on this idea of what's called ludology, how you play, as well as the story that you tell. So I think it's quite interesting. So games like Spirit Levels, Zoetrap, and Yellow Brick's Everwake are initially announced on a website, for instance, which sometimes provides clues or breadcrumbs to real-world locations that then players will register to attend. So you're given a time and a place to turn up, and maybe little else as a clue. You get a sense of what might be involved. There might be little movie clips that suggest, is this a horror or is this a mystery game? What's going on? But the idea is that, you start through maybe that entry point. Then you go to the experience itself, and you might use your mobile device or your smartphone, for instance, as part of the in-game experience. So as you're moving through this in-game experience and trying to unlock the story that you're participating in, you might get text messages telling you where to go, what to do, and so on. Players might actually tweet their experiences or might be invited to tweet their experiences as they're going through the game, and that adds to the kind of the story, to the narrative itself. And then after the event, events might have been filmed and then uploaded to YouTube, so you can watch a playback of your experience. Or participants might be offered an opportunity to blog about their own encounters in a kind of a journal form of what happened to me. So this becomes a kind of a wraparound experience. So it's not simply just going to the location is the experience. It's the whole gamut of the different engagements that you've had that define it. So I've just kind of put that into a form of a diagram here, where you can see that you can have a pre-event which is launched on a website or Facebook. Unfortunately, the font seems to have changed sizes here. So there are bits which are missing. We're talking about technology. We can never rely on PowerPoint fully, so it's going to catch us out at some point. So yeah, there's, you can have a website or Facebook announcement of the event before it starts. You go to the event, you have the event at a real location. There's the interactions, that's the word that's missing there, interactions with the location at the event, and then subsequently after the event, you can have photos taken that are uploaded, videos recorded, or social media. So that becomes the whole thing, rather than it just becoming the event itself. And increasingly, I think media experiences are becoming more and more about this kind of encounter. Okay, within that then, pervasive media is a term that's come up a few times, and I want to talk about what pervasive media is. And in many ways, it's a form of transmedia. It employs a panoply, typically, of technological systems to create real-world experiences. So it blends real life and technology. It can use technology to make sense of a participant's situation or environment, or digital media can be used to bridge the physical environment. So you're moving backwards and forwards between a digital space and a physical space. And the physical environment itself can then play back and augment or shape the digital space. So you're moving this kind of augmented reality where it's not quite the physical world that you're in, but it's not the digital world or the virtual world that's also running alongside it. It's a boundary between the two. And this is a very Gothic thing, actually. Gothic writing is all about the boundaries between spaces, these kind of liminal sort of boundary spaces. So something like this is perfect as a platform for playing around with ideas that emerge from the Gothic, about moving between categories of meaning or being. And I think that was quite interesting to me as a Gothic researcher. So I think there are kind of interesting ways in which this plays out. And in many senses, immersive gaming then, so something that brings a kind of a playful or gaming component to the experience, is something that can be explained in similar ways. It's a participatory practice which draws on methods and systems of pervasive media to create an absorbing, playable experience. Technology isn't always central to this. I mean, you can have, I don't know if people are familiar with the LARP or live action role-playing games where people dress up as goblins and elves and go into forests and fight battles, or those medieval recreation societies or Civil War recreation societies where you kind of dress up and reenact a particular historical experience. So you don't have to have technology in this kind of immersive gaming activity, but increasingly technology is being used at the heart of it. Now, pervasive media have been with us perhaps longer than we might presume. Parts of everyday cultural practice that manifest themselves in, for instance, when you go on an audio tour in a museum and you're holding one of those handsets and you're moving through the physical space, but you're also getting this media recording which gives you additional information that you can't simply get by looking at the exhibits. Or similarly, if you're in a planetarium, for instance, where you're sitting and you're kind of being pulled out from the auditorium into this outer space through, a combination of video, audio, and motion. So they're kind of, this is kind of part of what has been happening for many, many decades. In fact, the history is much older. If we go back to the 18th century, things like the Magic Lantern shows tried to blend real-life acting with these projected images on glass slides, which quite literally used smoke and mirrors to create this ghostly effect of spectres appearing before the audience. Or famously, Pepper's ghost, not Sarah's ghost, but John Henry Pepper's ghost, where he created this sort of spirit using mirrors again to animate Charles Dickens as the haunted man on stage. So there's a sense in which these things have been with us for centuries. My personal favourite is a film that came out in the 1950s called The Tingler with Vincent Price. Has anyone here seen or heard of The Tingler, just out of interest? Okay, you can see it or you can watch it on YouTube if you want. It's very cheesy, but it's quite good fun. But part of the gimmick of it was, the idea was this creature called the Tingler, which when you were at moments of great fear, was like a leech creature that would come and sit on your spine and drain your psychic energy and kill you if you didn't scream and let your fears out. And so at one point in the film, the Tingler escapes from the laboratory and the screen goes black. And a voiceover from the producer says, "Members of the audience, the Tingler has escaped into the auditorium. If you feel the Tingler approaching you, scream for your lives." And what they did is, in certain seats of the auditorium, they wired up these little buzzers which went off as the Tingler sort of brushed past you, and people did scream. And in fact, some people fainted, and there were nurses who were available in the aisles to come and help. So, I mean, these things have been used creatively as part of the entertainment experience for many, many years. More recent examples include things like secret cinema. So here we see Star Wars, where it's not just a screening, but people are going dressed up as characters from Star Wars. There's a kind of furniture and costumery of stormtroopers who lead you as prisoners to the auditorium. And things like No Fit State Circus, where you as a member of the audience are part of the performative experience. You move around with the performers. You're kind of embedded within it. There's no sort of clear separation between you and the performers. They'll come and talk to you. They'll come and pass you things and flirt with you. So it's kind of very, very interesting in terms of how these boundaries between performer and viewer are being broken down. And we see this infiltrating our kind of everyday homes as well. So gaming technologies like the Nintendo Wii or the Microsoft Kinect encourage us to play games by using our bodies to engage. So this idea of, our bodies becoming controllers was quite interesting to us. And we see also how that might infiltrate other aspects of everyday life. So, the late lamented Google Glass was an experiment that sought to bring that augmented reality experience where you're walking down the street and you can see, you bump into your friend and you can see traces of your digital conversations with them or digital reminders, or things like new wearable technologies like the Apple Watch, which allow us to sort of connect multiple spaces, the physical space of the world around us, the internal physiological space of our bodies, because they do things like measure our heartbeats, how many calories we burn, and also the digital space, because they report backwards and forwards through the digital. So you can get Facebook updates, send emails, send text messages, navigate routes. So there's kind of, again, this increasing blurring of those boundaries in our everyday lives. One creative example of how these kinds of technologies have been used is a project called Dance Room Spectroscopy, where essentially what they've done is hack together a load of Kinect, so those cameras that you get with your Xbox, to see a kind of 360-degree view of a room. And then people can dance. And what the Kinect does is it reads their body movements and it projects as forms of ephemeral art those body movements into sort of digital paint flows on the wall. So what you're doing is you're participating in a social experience of dancing, but you're also creating this work of art that has its kind of momentary aspect, and then you move on. So you're kind of generating art through participation. So I think there are interesting things that are being done to hack together technology and these ideas of creative performance. Okay, so I want to move on by just talking specifically with these thoughts in mind about the collaboration that we were involved in translating Jekyll and Hyde then into this pervasive media game. So I explained that we worked over this 3-month period. Part of the process involved various activities. So we analysed the text, we mined it for information and data. I met with my collaborators in various ways. We looked at sort of mapping patterns within the text. So there's quite a heavy analytical element that was involved. We also took as our sort of influences, we didn't want a kind of a clunky Victorian-esque look for the project. We took as our influences that kind of early history of cinema where a lot of experimental expressionist art was being used in creative ways. So we turned to these early horror adaptations of things like Jekyll and Hyde and Nosferatu that used expressionism as a kind of the aesthetic that we wanted to follow. Part of what we had to do for React was blog regularly as well. So we were expected to talk about the process and explain it and what our ambitions were. A lot of the work was actually talking and writing, believe it or not. For a technological project, the large part of it was actually drawing diagrams on flip charts, sitting down and just talking to each other to imagine these things, rather than sitting and programming or coding. That kind of came at the later stages and was a key part of it, but it wasn't the driving part of it. It was the creative process that we sat at the center of. So we came up with a kind of a structure. We came up with a 3-part structure for the game. And a lot of the conversations then were mapped by Simon into these kind of mind maps or trees that helped us work out how can we turn a linear narrative into this gamified experience. Sorry for the gratuitous chest shot there, but what we used was this chest strap. So when we were working on the project, it was I think relatively, although it was 3 years ago, relatively early days for biotechnology and wearables. So we're using these chest straps which measure heartbeat, breathing, lung capacity, skin temperature, as well as posture. They would send signals to a smartphone. So you could log all of these data of what a person's body was doing. And then our challenge in technical terms was how can you translate that into an experience? We also used various emergent technologies that we could connect the digital to actual physical spaces. So things where a digital signal will then unlock a door. So if you hold your breath, a door unlocks, or if you breathe fast, the lights stay on. So there are lots of ways in which we could connect a person's body to the digital, which would then connect to the physical space. So there's kind of that interconnection. And we came up with a kind of a motif then that we wanted to explore in the prototype. And I've just got a video. I think I'll wrap up here because then we can continue this maybe in the Q&A because I know we're pressed for time. We'll just show a video clip that we prepared for the prototype launch, which was showcasing what a player might experience if they're playing the game. So they're coming into the building for the first time, and what might that experience look like? So hopefully PowerPoint won't let us down this time, and it should play the video.
His tale went by before my mind in a scroll of lighted pictures. I would be aware of the great fields of lamps of a nocturnal city, then of the figure of a man walking swiftly, then of a child running from the doctors. And then these met, and that human juggernaut trod the child down and passed on regardless of the screams. Or else I would see a room or in a rich house where my friend lay asleep, and then the door of that room would be opened. There would stand by his side a figure to whom power was given, and even at that dead hour, he must rise and do its bidding. And still, the figure had no face by which I might know it. Even in my dreams, it had no face, or one that baffled me and melted before my eyes.
So the idea there is we're kind of, it's obviously a promotional video for the game, but the idea would be how the player can interact with the environment. So they're, for instance, lying, invited into a room, lying on the four-poster bed, and you see a projection of the dream sequence. That's an adaptation from the novel, and your actions will then sort of trigger that projection. So it's as if you're lying in the bed having the dream sequence. So that's where we got up to by the summer of 2013. As Sarah mentioned, what happened after that is React provided a second round of funding to previous successful award holders called the Alumni Fund. And we got a second round of funding, which started this April and runs to the end of the year, to develop the collaboration, to continue the collaboration, see how we can take it further. And Sarah mentioned that we were part of this event called The Rooms, where we had a go. We managed to have a go at what it was like. And it's quite interesting because we were in these Victorian police cells, subterranean police cells. So we actually went down to the bowels of this city location. And it was very, very atmospheric. I mean, what you can create just by doing that, let alone with the added factors of the kind of the biotechnology, projections, and all the other panoply of effects was very, very interesting. And here what you see, we weren't allowed to take photos in the location because it was pitch black. But here's the ante-room as well. So there's the middle picture is the kind of the steps down into the basement and the police cells. And then here are the computers that were monitoring all the processes. So they were telling me, oh, well, we know the person's doing this here by just looking at the graph of their biodata, which was very, very interesting to me. And here's some of our postgrads getting wired up for the experience as well. Okay, I think I'll leave it there. Okay, thanks very much.